hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. So November is almost upon us, and with the coming of November means also the coming of Nonfiction November. Now, Nonfiction November is a sort of month-long readathon challenge hoopla that was started by the inimitable Olive at A Book Olive, and there's been, I saw on Twitter that there's been some folks who were not aware of the pre-existing Nonfiction November and tried to come for her, and she very gracefully but decidedly put them in their place, which I approve of. If you're not watching her, you should be. I put her in my Channels Like Me video. She's awesome. Love her. But she started this challenge because here on BookTube, sometimes nonfiction doesn't get always the love that it deserves. I think in the circles of BookTube I watch, there is a lot of reading of nonfiction, but I don't think that is like a universal experience here on BookTube. So Olive's idea for this is basically that for the month of November, the only challenge you have is to read a little bit more nonfiction than you normally do. So if you normally read 0 nonfiction, read 1 nonfiction book and like you're participating. And I really love that approach to it because I think it's meant to be very like inclusive and just like, hey, just give it a try kind of a thing. I will link to the announcements for Nonfiction November somewhere. I will be participating insofar as I always am reading a little bit of nonfiction. It's hard for me to quantify how much I'm reading, so I'm not sure, if I'll be reading more per se, but I always read nonfiction, so in that sense I'll be participating. But I thought that I would just hop on here and give you guys, literally I just went through my bookshelves and grabbed some things that I recommend to people frequently for nonfiction and just give you some ideas if you're looking to put together a TBR. So I think sometimes people have a hard time finding nonfiction that they like, and that's a part of why they don't get as into nonfiction. So anyway, this is just some titles that I've enjoyed and that I often recommend to people who are looking to give nonfiction a try. Now, 2 caveats here. This is of course going to be reflective of my personal taste in nonfiction. Nonfiction, maybe not more so than fiction, but as much as fiction, is incredibly dependent on your own interests and like things that you want to read about of your individuality. So like what I like to read about in nonfiction may very well be quite different than what you want to read about in nonfiction. So like caveat here is that like these are my preferences, and so it's reflective of my taste, which may not align with yours. The second is one of the biggest tips I can give somebody trying to get into nonfiction is that really consider giving audio a try with nonfiction. If you are in any way open to like radio or podcast, I think that audiobooks with nonfiction are a nice like bridge into the genre because they feel familiar in the same way that you kind of understand how to process a radio show or a podcast. So those are 2 caveats and tips. And like I said, these are literally just things I grabbed from my shelves. So some recommendations, some random recommendations as you're formulating your nonfiction TBR. One of the clear biases in my personal preferences on nonfiction is for history and for science. Like those are 2 of my favorite things to read as a part of nonfiction. So a couple of ones that I don't have in physical form to tell you about in this area. One would be Stand From the Beginning by Ibra X. Kendi. That is a book that I finished a couple months ago and really just like, it was a 5-star read. One of my favorite books I've read this year. It's an intellectual history of of racist ideas towards Black people in America, and it's just like real good and something I think pretty much everybody should read probably. So I would definitely recommend that. Another one that I don't have in physical form anymore because I got it as an ebook is All the President's Men by Bob Woodward and Bernstein. So I actually believe that when you're seeing this on Friday, I'm going to have a book or movie on All the President's Men because both the book and the movie are top 10 in their respective media categories for me. So like All the President's Men, the book, is a top 10 book for me of all time, and All the President's Men, the movie, is a top 10 movie for me of all time. So like I'm going to do a little comparison of that because we have midterms coming up. So I felt like that was an appropriate way to celebrate that. So anyway, all that to say, I absolutely adore the book, All the President's Men. It is a classic in its sort of journalistic nonfiction genre. It is fascinating. I first read it in college, and it was really formative to sort of my sense of myself as a political person, I guess is the way to say it. I absolutely love the journalistic aspect of it and the investigative piece of it. So if you like mysteries, this might be a good nonfiction option for you, because they're kind of like digging in and uncovering the truth. And it's just super, super good. And if you have recently, a big book from Bob Woodward has been Fear. I've been slowly listening to that on audio, and it is a lot to take in. I can only listen to it in like little spurts, but that has been getting a lot of hype. So like, I just wanted to shout out the original and the best from Bob Woodward, which is All the President's Men. And then a few histories, a couple of these are very scientific in their kind of bent that I thought that I would share. So one is one of my favorite histories I read last year, which was White Trash, the 400-year Untold History of Class in America by Nancy Isenberg. Yeah, I think that this is another one that's real essential reading. If you are not from America, just so you know, there's this like canard culturally that we are a classless society, and like there's always this sort of specter of like, you're gonna incite a class war, and like what, like, it's real adorable that we like to pretend that this is not a thing, but it is a thing. It has always been a thing, and essentially this is documenting the history of the white underclass in America that has been there since literally the first ship arrived from the UK. I mean, like, it is baked into the way our structure, like our society works, and I think if you want to understand, like, this would be a great companion read with Stamped from the Beginning, because really it's talking about two of the most significant underclasses, like, together, that we have in the US. So anyway, this is a fascinating book. I did listen to a lot of this on audio, and I thought it worked well as audio. Another history, but this time as I'm looking at this, I'm like, I have very clear themes as to what I'm interested in. This is essentially, this is a classic in nonfiction, in terms of like a perennial bestseller, and that's Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. The subtitle is The Fates of Human Societies. And basically he's trying to look at, his underlying question here is, what historically has made certain societies set up to succeed and seemingly other ones not set up to thrive in the same way? Like, essentially, how did these huge civilizations on the continents of Europe and Asia essentially end up kind of colonizing the entire world? Like, what was it about it? And he gets a lot into like natural resources and weather and technological innovations driven by certain conditions. And it's just, it's historical for sure, but it also has a lot of interesting sort of like science baked into it, like a history of science in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think this is a unique sort of genre-bending nonfiction type book, and there's a reason why it's always a bestseller in this kind of genre. And then another scientific history, this is The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Basically, this is a history of like how we got to the dietary recommendations that emerged from the FDA in the early 1980s, and essentially how fat became villainized, how that's not necessarily based on definitive science, but on a lot, like, it's super interesting. It's basically like kind of the gerrymandering and jockeying among scientists to sort of win the regulatory race, and it's just super interesting. I mean, I clearly have a bias here, but like, this was a very instructive book to me. But anyway, I just thought I would shout this out because I do think as like a nutritional science history, it's really interesting. And again, I've listened to this as audio and read the actual book, so like, it works well as both. Another title that is just really kind of like straight up science is Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life by Emily Nagoski. Also, the visual pun on this cover is everything. This is basically a book about female sexuality. I think I've talked about this before, but like, it has some really helpful metaphors to think about like how sex relates to our overall life, how female sexuality works. And I think my line on this in the past has been, if you are a woman or if you have sex with women, I would recommend this. I think that it has a lot of just like, it sums things up really nicely, and I think that I have found myself referring this to a lot of friends in terms of like when they have been confiding in me, that I think that this is like a really helpful book for your own personal edification. So I definitely recommend this one. And I just realized I'm about to transition into memoir, but a genre that I haven't explicitly called out here, but that I do read a lot of and definitely like have a lot of recommendations for, is women's history, women's memoirs, like feminist literature that is nonfiction. that's definitely something that I read a lot of. So Come As You Are, sort of the sciencey end of this. I'm about to talk about the memoir end of it, but like for a couple of histories I've enjoyed in that area, I would say Trainwreck by Sady Doyle is really, really good. And then Rebecca Traister has had 2 in the last couple years that I think are pretty good. All the Single Ladies and Good and Mad just came out. So little bridging here to get into the memoir I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk about 2. Hunger by Roxane Gay is probably my favorite memoir I've ever read. It was my favorite book of 2017. I'm definitely, again, have personal biases here because I felt very seen by this book. I have a lot of parallels to her story. But anyway, it's beautifully, very like starkly written and a very challenging book. So definitely, you know, buyer beware there. I mean, it gets pretty intense, but it's just really good. And then I thought kind of a good one to highlight here, just for people who might be intimidated by nonfiction or memoir or whatever, and want something that's a little bit different. March by John Lewis is a memoir in graphic novel form. It is absolutely fantastic. I read it for Southern September. I really, really loved it, and I think that this is a book that would be a really friendly point of entry for a lot of people who maybe are a little intimidated by nonfiction. I think this could be a really great way to kind of get into, it is memoir, but it also really is just, a lot of it is a history of the civil rights movement. So yeah, I think this could be a friendly kind of starting point. And then one last kind of like nonfiction genre bender, because it's kind of memoir, it's kind of true crime, like it's sort of in between, and that is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is another one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. I actually read it right when it came out, so when I was reading it, they had not yet found the Golden State serial killer, so that was kind of a fun reading experiment. I'm not sure if in subsequent editions of this book they're going to update it with the findings of that. I don't know. But anyway, it's an interesting book. The author, Michelle McNamara, passed away before she finished, so her husband and her, you know, fellow researchers sort of finished it up for her. And yeah, it's just really, really good. And like I said, I think of it as sort of a genre bender within nonfiction. So if you are, you know, kind of a veteran nonfiction reader and you're looking for something a little bit different, it might be something worth thinking about. And then finally, I thought I would just tell you 2 of the books that I'm hoping I can get my act together and read for Nonfiction November. One is Not That Bad, which is about rape culture. It's a collection of essays edited by Roxane Gay. I started it and just kind of didn't end up finishing it because I got distracted by more pressing books, but now that I'm like clearing the deck of my library and ARC situation, I can get back to my mood reading. The other one is We Were 8 Years in Power by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm very excited about that. These are both essay collections, I guess. And I absolutely love Between the World and Me. I thought that was a really interesting memoir, both in the way it was executed, because it's told in the style of a letter to his son, but also just in its content and kind of philosophy, like where he's coming from. I think he's a really interesting voice in kind of the Black Lives Matter / just like thinking about race in America space. So I'm excited to try to get to both of these. I also have a number of nonfiction audio that I could be listening to. Like I mentioned, I've been sort of like dipping in and out of Fear by Bob Woodward, but it's so intense that I can't really listen to much of it at a time. It's like, man, it definitely is a book documenting naked greed and power. So there you go, if that tells you anything. And then I have a couple of other just like, I can't even think of them off the top of my head, but nonfiction things that I have gotten from Audible over the last few months that I could be reading. So yeah, I'm sure I will dive into 1, 2, or all of those. Anyway, I just thought it might be helpful as somebody who does read a lot of nonfiction. I really like nonfiction a lot, to just kind of hop on here and give you some suggestions about books that I often recommend to people looking to get into nonfiction, and just some of the things that I might read for Nonfiction November. I hope this is helpful as people are thinking about their TBRs possibly. So I think that will do it for me. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.